So this is the second half that I was asked to assist with, and this is on employment services available through the VA and in general. So you heard earlier this morning about some of the resources to assist veterans with employment. We'll have two guests, two presenters, two panelists that are representing VHA, our VA, and we'll have two non-VA representatives, both of them veterans. So I'm very glad to have them here today. So first up, we're going to have Dr. Ryan Faulkner, who is going to be talking about our residential programs at the VA, a treatment program, various programs. Dr. Faulkner has been with the VA now, how many years? 15 years. 15 years. Psychologist by training, and from the Cincinnati VA. His domiciliary program is across the river, though, in Fort Thomas, Kentucky. But it is still our resource here in Ohio. Next, we have Chelsea Judson. Chelsea is a licensed, certified rehabilitation counselor. Sorry about that. I'm so used to talking to social workers. Working at the Central Ohio Healthcare System of Ohio, Columbus, VA. And Chelsea, you've been 3 years?
Yeah.
3 years with the VA, and is the program manager for our vocational rehab services, is what we're referring to it these days. So thank you, both of you, for coming today. In addition to Dr. Faulkner and Chelsea, we have Zach Ludi, representing Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. Mr. Ludi is a U.S. Air Force OEF veteran and serves as the Veterans Program Manager for Ohio Department of Job and Family Services. So we're very glad to have him here today. And finally, we'll have John Rust. Mr. Rust is a co-founder of the Overwatch Partnership, and he'll be speaking about that today. And Mr. Rust is also a veteran serving in the U.S. Army Reserve for over 16 years, including tours, deployments in Iraq in 2005 and 2007. So thank you again, both of you, for your service. Okay, so I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Faulkner. Just flip through. Yep.
All right, everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. So I'm going to talk broadly about the residential treatment programs across the VA system. And try to highlight some of the differences across those programs and what that looks like in different locations. The residential level of care is an intermediate level of care that exists between outpatient and inpatient psychiatry. It is fairly unique in that those beds are often few and far between to find. Most places have the outpatient and inpatient, but residential is a little bit of a more scarce entity. We're fortunate in the VA that there's been a large investment in residential treatment over the years, and that's been something that's been very, very valuable for those veterans who really need that slightly higher level of care than what we can do in outpatient. These are programs where the patients live with us, they reside with us, thus the name, and the length of stay in these programs does vary a bit by program. On the shorter end, for especially short-term stabilization, alcohol and drug treatment, it may be 21 days, 30 days. The program that I'm affiliated with, which is a homeless domiciliary program, they can stay up to 7 months. And so depending on the nature of that treatment and what the goals of those treatments are, there can be a variable length of stay to try to meet those needs. Some important things to keep in mind when we talk about the residential level of care. These are voluntary programs. So in the eyes of the VA and with the veterans who come to us, they are coming of their own free will. Even if they are court required, court ordered to come to us for treatment, to complete treatment, they are still voluntary in our eyes. And what that means is if a patient decides for whatever reason that they are going to discharge themselves from the program, we have no ability, no right to hold them against their will, with those very, exceptions of if they're imminently suicidal or homicidal. So if someone is court ordered to treatment, and on occasion we will have someone say, well, I want this person to do 6 months of treatment in your program. We can't guarantee that they're going to get 6 months of treatment in the program. If the program is set up to allow for that length of a program, if they're compliant with all elements of the program, if they choose to stay with us, then that's certainly a possibility. But again, if they should relapse, if there should be behavioral problems, if they get into a fight, any number of conditions that might lead to a discharge prior to that 6 months, that's the challenge for us. It also means we can't take custody. So for people who may have not a great track record with treatment, if they are court involved and you really want them to be in custody, you're probably going to have to look at your community correctional programs to be able to really do that. The VA would not be able to serve that need. Many of the programs throughout VISN 10 do have residential programs, but not all. And Columbus happens to be one that does not, as an ambulatory clinic. So historically, veterans in the Columbus catchment area who have needed that residential level of care, many of them have been referred down to Chillicothe, who does have a number of residential beds, sometimes to Dayton, on rare occasions down to Cincinnati. One of the big initiatives that we're working on is the residential programs across VISN 10 right now is a coordination of care. And we're trying to set up situations where if we have a patient in any part of VISN 10 who needs residential care and the local VA cannot serve that need, can we get them into a bed at another location? And so trying to really leverage those available resources to make better use of those. And if there is places where that's harder to come by, can we get them into treatment elsewhere? And so we're working through that and developing some strategies to try to make that a more seamless transition. Many of the RRTPs do have a particular focus, and I mentioned a couple earlier. Some of these are short-term SUD, substance use disorder stabilization programs. My program, as I said, is a homeless program. There are some that have more of a severe mental illness program, and we do have residential PTSD programs where that is the primary aim, is treating intensively PTSD. So usually they're going to fall into one of those categories. In all honesty, many of the residential patients we serve across any of those bed sections usually have a variety of those issues going on. So mental health, addiction, and a variety of others. So it really comes down to what is sort of the emphasis or priority for care in terms of figuring out what's sort of the best way to make use of those resources. It's also the case that not all VAs have all of those bed sections. So for example, in Cincinnati, we have a homeless dom, we have a SUD stabilization program, and we have residential PTSD. We have those 3 bed sections available to us. As with everything else, it has entirely been hurt by COVID. In my program, for example, most of our patient bedrooms are 3, 4, and 5 person rooms. And under COVID, at one point, we were only allowed to have 1 patient in one of those rooms. And so that dramatically decreased our census from where we once were. We're now up to a point where we can have up to 3 in some of our larger rooms. So we're gradually increasing that bed availability, but that has been a real challenge in terms of meeting those needs with the appropriate COVID precautions in place. Obviously, when you're living in close quarters with one another, the risk of COVID spread is quite high. And so trying to do everything we can to continue to provide that care while also reducing the risk of infection. In terms of basic admission criteria, these are true across the entire VA. These are standard criteria that are used to apply to really any of our residential programs. And what that's really highlighting is trying to find that goodness of fit. Is this someone who does not require a higher level of care for any number of reasons? Many of the patients we serve in residential are designated as high risk for suicide. They have made prior suicide attempts. They could decompensate very quickly and become suicidal again. So that in and of itself does not preclude them from being served in residential, but if they're imminently at risk, then they probably need at least some period of time on a psychiatric unit to stabilize before they would be proper in the residential setting. Medical complications can also be a barrier. If they truly need to be in a medical bed or a skilled nursing facility, or they cannot manage their ADLs, they again would not be appropriate in the residential setting. We would need to find some other way to serve those needs more properly in those settings. Most of the patients we're dealing with, they lack that stable lifestyle. Again, for my program, one of those big factors is homelessness. It is awfully difficult for someone to benefit from treatment if they're homeless and don't have access to resources. So that's a good example of that lack of a stable lifestyle. And for someone who otherwise might be successful in outpatient treatment, homelessness could be that trump card to say they really need to be in a safe, structured setting to allow them to benefit from the services that we have to offer. They also have to identify treatment goals that align with the program. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. Since many of our patients have a variety of comorbid mental health and addiction related issues, we have to kind of figure out what needs to be treated and which of our residential beds is most appropriate. In Cincinnati, many of our folks will go through our short-term stabilization program, the SUD program, and if they are homeless, they then transition over into our homeless bed section upon completion. So that allows them to have a more focused drug and alcohol addiction stabilization before transitioning into the homeless DOM. And by doing that, we hopefully give them a longer period of time in residential treatment with that structure to really help them achieve those goals. And then in terms of just sort of what do we typically see? Well, these are some of the common things we see when the patients that we are serving are coming into treatment. I know in my program in Cincinnati, about everyone has some type of addiction. 98% roughly are coming with some type of addiction. But I have about 80% who also have comorbid mental health issues. So lots of depression, PTSD, other forms of anxiety, in some cases schizophrenia and other types of psychotic disorders. So most of the patients that we're serving in our homeless program have both the mental health and the recovery needs that need to be addressed concurrently in order to give them the best opportunity for success. We also see a lot of people who have had unmet medical needs. It's not uncommon for us to have someone come into treatment who has newly diagnosed cancer or diabetes or uncontrolled blood pressure. They haven't been taking care of themselves. They have not been in to see their physician in some time. And so a lot of times they don't even realize that they have these medical issues that are untreated. And so getting them linked up with care and helping them get on track with such things is really critical for their success. Many, if not most, have some history, sometimes current legal involvement. In Cincinnati, I'm also the director of our Veteran Justice Outreach programs. So a lot of the patients that we end up serving in our homeless DOM come to us directly from jail. Our VGO staff go into the jail, they do the outreach, they screen them, and we accept them, then they transport them from release directly into residential treatment. And that really helps for them to have a better opportunity to really transition directly into treatment without any gaps in care. And also many of our folks are also involved with our veteran treatment courts in Cincinnati. So while they're going through the DOM treatment, they're also attending court on a regular basis and working through those expectations. So that is really helpful also to help keep them on track and have an added layer of accountability. Other things that we see, most of the people we serve in residential have had a lengthy history of treatment. We are not typically the first stop for these folks. They have been in outpatient treatment. They have often been through multiple episodes of residential care. Their level of addiction and mental health issues tends to be on the more severe end of that continuum. And so they're people who really benefit from that added structure in the residential setting. We're not staffed as highly as an inpatient psychiatric unit would be, but we do have staff around the clock who are there to monitor things, to make sure that they're accountable, that they're there at bed checks. We're doing drug screens on them regularly. There's a lot of oversight in that residential setting that really does help give them some degree of sobriety, some degree of recovery while they're transitioning back into hopefully successful community reintegration and housing and employment and such. And so how do we do that? Well, in residential, we have an interdisciplinary treatment team. So we've got everything from psychologists to psychiatrists. We've got nurse practitioners and MDs. We've got social workers, vocational counselors, peer support, rec therapy, clinical pharmacists, dietitians. all of us work together to meet the needs of the veterans that we're serving and really have a very sort of holistic, integrative approach to doing that. What are the different things that each individual patient needs in order to be successful? What are the things that they need to address? What are the skills that they need to learn? Not only in terms of mental health and addiction, but basic financial management. A lot of our folks have a really hard time with budgeting and being able to, to live in a way that is supportive and in line with what the income they have. Sober recreation. Many of them have never really done anything sober, and so finding new hobbies or activities or recreation. Healthy eating from our nutrition, learning how to take their meds properly and manage their diabetes effectively. So how do we address all those different needs in such a way that when it does come time for them to leave the program, they have a nice seamless transition? And that's where we will often partner with SSVF and HUD-VASH and some of the other programs that you've heard about today, so that they can literally leave the DOM or leave the residential program, into an apartment, leave with a job lined up, those types of things. Because otherwise, it obviously makes that transition much, much more difficult if those things are not in order before they leave us. And that is our goal. I like to say in our program, if we can do a good job, and by the time they leave us, if they have a plan for long-term recovery, if they can transition to stable housing, and if they can leave with a living wage, then we've given them every opportunity for success going forward. And that's really our philosophy and our goal. Just as by way of a segue, and I'm going to pass this off, the last thing I have on there is work therapy. The next presenter is going to go into more detail on that. But within the VA, one element of that is what's called the compensated work therapy program. And so a lot of times our services, especially janitorial, groundskeeping, food and nutrition, have contracts with our residential programs. And the patients, while they're in treatment, have the opportunity to work. They can work full-time for those services. They get paid for that work. And that allows them, while they're in that structured setting, to have the opportunity to earn money, to save money, and to serve as sort of a job hardening opportunity, getting them back into the workforce, getting them back into the routine of full-time employment, with the aim that transitions them into community job placement by the time they leave the residential programs. So with that, let me turn it over.
All right. So moving forward, I'm going to talk about a couple of the different programs that we have within the Veterans Health Administration to assist veterans with different needs in reentering the workforce.
Yeah, or you can.
Is this better? So not to be confused with, we do have the Veterans Benefits Administration, who also has a program, Veteran Readiness and Employment, which I'll touch on because anyone who works with veterans will probably hear about that quite a bit as well. To start, we have the Homeless Veterans Community Employment Services. So going back to our discussion regarding HUD-VASH and healthcare for homeless veterans programs, we kind of recognize that there are some barriers that are very significant when it comes to veterans experiencing homelessness and reintegrating into the workforce that really would require building community partnerships and supportive partners who understand those barriers, which is how this program was born. Part of that is that there's a community employment coordinator who is designated to be at every VA facility who works specifically with veterans experiencing homelessness. They're integrated within our homeless programs so that they can do that kind of treatment team integration and work with those caseworkers to assist veterans, also while finding out what their local communities have to offer for those veterans so that they can quickly get them placed, especially in the case of needing rapid employment, where maybe we're trying to prevent homelessness before it's something that we need to go into the HUD-VASH system for. For veterans who are receiving HUD-VASH, they can collaborate with their caseworkers and with that veteran to look at a reentry strategy and how they would like to kind of return to work, particularly after when we consider, we talked about it's traumatizing. So how that might be impacting that veteran on a psychological level, their ability to kind of be confident and go back into that is typically impaired. So finding those really supportive environments is a big piece of that, in addition to addressing some of those typical barriers that we see, like gaps in work history or references or needing references. Let's see here. So that being said, I think we've talked a lot about how when a veteran's experiencing homelessness, there's usually a lot of other issues that are going along with that. And so sometimes that rapid employment model, just connecting with employers, that won't be enough. We then have our Veterans Health Administration vocational rehabilitation programs. Previously, well, still referred to as compensated work therapy, but we have expanded availability within that. So some programs are connected to that, some aren't. The goal of those programs is to assist veterans with disabilities in obtaining and maintaining competitive employment. What makes it really special is the small caseload size of the providers. So when you think of all the resources that we've heard about today, all the barriers that are facing the veterans that we work with, this is a spot where you've got one person that can really help them put it all together. And then continue to work with their psychologists and their caseworkers and their primary care physician, because a lot of times we see physical and psychiatric disability. And we do this through a range of modalities and various levels of intensity. These programs are rooted in recovery principles. So I think another thing that's special about this is now that we, if you think along the process where we've moved beyond maybe that immediate crisis, I need housing, and we're starting to stabilize, we can really start to shift the conversation around growth and moving forward in terms of thriving. So I always kind of think of it as helping that veteran shift that mindset from survival mode to to that growth mindset. It comes down to the idea that anyone can work with the right supports. So what we're really doing is that we're addressing systemic but also attitudinal barriers. So what vocational rehabilitation truly is a holistic counseling process that's not only addressing the external barriers that we see, whether that be employers having requirements for background or drug testing or whatever it may be, but also the attitudinal barriers that that person with the disability may be carrying with them, how that may be impacting their sense of self-efficacy or ability to move forward. We do this with each veteran's assigned a vocational rehabilitation specialist or a vocational rehabilitation counselor. Our counselors are certified rehabilitation counselors who are master's level counselors that are specialized in the medical and psychosocial aspects of disability. So again, bringing it all together, those different pieces that impact work beyond just applying for a job. So some of the things that a vocational rehabilitation specialist or counselor would be doing when they work with a veteran is starting with that assessment and counseling process, really digging into where do you want to be and where do you want to go from here, and then setting those goals, helping veterans break that down into manageable steps. Within that, we're also looking at what resources are out there that are going to help us get there. So it's a little bit of an in-between of the counseling process, but also case management involved as well. This is where we might start looking at, okay, well, VBA has these benefits and can pay for you to go back to school. So what do you need in the immediate so that you can maintain housing and get some income while we work towards that long-term goal? What WIOA programs are out there that, we can help you kind of get connected with, different resources like that to see what's that long-term pathway, and we can kind of work backwards from there. Benefits advising is a big part of this as well. So we talk about all the resources, and then we also look at the reality that most of these resources have income limits, or when a veteran starts working, they start losing those resources. And when we're talking that even in our society today, we're wondering, well, how are people kind of making it if wages aren't enough? And that's when we're talking about people with college degrees and protective factors. A lot of these marginalized populations that we work with may not have as much opportunity to get by. So I think a lot of times veterans who have gone through these different systems are left feeling like I have to choose between being able to work and the benefits that come from that, and having my basic needs met and stability. So that counselor would work with them and kind of look at how those different systems would be impacted by work so that veterans can make informed decisions. Our programs can also help protect some of their VA benefits that maybe eventually they would have to give up should they return to work. Well, they can kind of try out work and make sure that it's maintainable for them. Advocacy, job analysis, development placement, assistive technology, all those different pieces that you think someone with a disability going back to work may need to sustain work. A lot of times, accommodations can be informal. It might be something as simple as, an ergonomic chair or changing their desk. A lot of times it might be more finding that right job fit, the environment for them. Another piece that we're looking at, I think when we talk about veterans, we tend to talk about a lot of the common traits that veterans share, but veterans we work with are incredibly diverse, and our ability to build careers and integrate into the community is impacted by a lot of other factors. I think sometimes it's easy to assume that the veterans we're working with are seeing the world just from the lens of a veteran. But working with a range, I think the youngest veteran I've worked with is 18 years old. The oldest is 84. Your needs, your career development, how you see the world, how you see yourself in that varies greatly. So I think, again, that the individualized care that this provides is really special because it's kind of helping look through where are those actual barriers and how can we navigate those, and where is it that maybe your mindset can be addressed and help you kind of thrive where you want and go where you want to go. So not every VA has all of these modalities offered. Every VA is required to provide supported employment services and transitional work services to veterans. So I'll start with the most intensive, supported employment. That is typically for our veterans with either co-occurring disorders, oftentimes severe mental illness. And this is the most intensive, where these providers would be working with the veteran at least once, typically twice a week. A lot of times they're going to be finding out what their goals are, what their strengths are, and then actually going out to employers and carving a job. That's what it's called, where they would talk to that employer and develop a job specifically for that veteran. And then they would continue to meet with the veteran. They would go on site, do site observations. They would work with the employer to get feedback that they can include in their work with the veteran, and continue to meet with those treatment teams weekly that meet with them. So typically those within our intensive treatment divisions, like our psychosocial rehabilitation centers or intensive dual disorder treatment teams, so working with psychosis and substance use disorders. Community-based employment services, it's a similar process, but we recognize that not all veterans need that level of intervention. So this may be for a veteran who has, fairly acute symptoms, but is looking for a job that they wouldn't need a provider there on site with them or really working with their employers. Transitional work is where I think Dr. Faulkner mentioned, so you start with a transitional placement at a hospital before moving on to competitive employment in the community. And now we're also offering supported self-employment and supported education to assist veterans in those goals, especially supported education. That's nice because since we have those smaller case sizes, we can help them and give them more follow-along support if they're utilizing our VBA, vocational or veteran readiness and employment benefits, and going through school. And then vocational assistance is for any veteran who just needs kind of a point in the right direction. So another thing that's great about these services is that we don't have a definition or predetermined kind of definition of what would qualify as a disability for veterans to get services. Locally, that may vary a little bit, but for the most part, any veteran who says, I need assistance with employment, we can kind of get in there, start working with them and see what level they need and go from there. So.
Thank you, Chelsea. So now we'll have Zach come up, speak for our state partners. Thank you, sir.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zach Ludy. I'm with the State of Ohio Job and Family Services, not VA. I'm with the community partner side of the house. So I just want to share a little bit about what we do today. Oh, what did I do? I escaped. Wrong button. Wrong button.
Just hit that button.
That button. Got it. Got it. Guess this is my first county fair. All right. Here we go. So what we have is through Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, we have Ohio Means Job Centers. You might hear them in other states called American Job Centers. We're a proud partner in the American Job Center Network. The best way to think about us is we are federally funded state workers in county offices. Makes a lot of sense when I try to explain that at Thanksgiving to my parents. So basically within the Ohio Means Job Centers, think of them like your local libraries. Think about resource room with computers, fax machines, phones. It can help folks with workshops as far as resumes, social media workshops, how to build your brand, budgeting, budget calculations, computer skills, resume writing, career exploration. So we work a lot with the VA and partner with the VA. She mentioned Veteran Readiness and Employment Program, Chapter 31, Veteran Readiness and Employment Program. They send folks to school. On the front end, we have a great partnership with those. We get anybody who's interested in going to school to the VA programs. On the VBA side of the house, we help provide career exploration to those folks to make sure they're making good, sound career choices, because I know I didn't make the best when I first got out of the military. For example, if you want to be an underwater basket weaver, don't stay in Columbus, Ohio. You might want to look along the coastlines. Not a whole lot of water here. So my thing was I was aviation maintenance in the military, got out, thought I'd do aviation maintenance. I didn't do my research, didn't know my facts. I just went to school to get out of mom's house right when I got out of the military, and I ended up going to school for aviation maintenance. Ended up for an unknown airline in Detroit, Michigan, shoveling snow off aircraft wings in negative 17-degree weather, asking when I can get back to Florida again, where I was stationed. They said, about 20 years, kid. So that's why we work a lot with folks, a lot of transitioning service members. I attend a lot of the TAP briefings, Transition Assistance Program briefings out at Wright Pat for all the troops and soldiers getting out of the military, transitioning back to Ohio or wherever they're going with career exploration and a warm handoff to one of us nationwide. So inside that job centers, we work a lot. They serve everybody. The big wide net is serve everybody, but we do have specialized programs within those job centers that serve military veterans, military spouses, active duty service members, and military spouses as well. Within those centers, anybody that comes in gets first access, that's a veteran, gets first access to workshops and other things. So within my program, I'm called the Jobs for Veterans State Grant. We're a Department of Labor funded program. We actually have certain populations that we work with specifically within these Ohio Means Job Centers. We have folks that do one-on-one case management, help folks with the interview prep, help them, with hygiene and communication skills and how to do their resume and those types of things, and how to go to an interview on time and be prepared and those types of things. So within our Jobs for Veterans State Grant, I'm not going to read every single one of these, but we do have special populations. Our number one priority is special disabled and disabled veterans. So a disability, it could be physical, it could be non-physical. For myself, I'm a disabled veteran, but you may never know it, because everybody thinks when they see disabled veteran, they think wheelchair or something along those lines. That's not the case. There's a lot of different things that the VA service connects for disabilities. And we work around those disabilities. We talk about reasonable accommodations with employers. She had mentioned it earlier. Working around certain things, like for example, an individual with a traumatic brain injury we were working with recently needed a reasonable accommodation. He knows how to do the job and put the widgets together. He just didn't know how to couldn't remember how to start and stop the machine. So what they did with HR, something as simple as writing up a card to say, hey, here's the process to start it, here's the process to end it, laminated it. At the end of the day, now he's been there 3 years working for that company. Something as simple as that could be a reasonable accommodation. But we also work with offenders, those that are formerly incarcerated or currently incarcerated. So we have a lot of our what we call DVOPs, or Disabled Veteran Outreach Program Specialists. I'll always call them vet reps for short. And they're out there. They work a lot with the social workers in the prisons and those types of facilities to help try to outreach to those populations. We also work with low income and 18 to 24-year-olds, the ones that had no idea when they got out of the military. Those are high targeted unemployment populations. kind of talked about that already with what we do. In addition to Jobs for Veterans State Grant, we have OhioMeansJobs.com. You might have heard of it with all the marketing and advertising going on lately with the radio and TV commercials and ads. There you can post thousands of jobs, view your resume, view resources and tools to help you job search online. We also explore career paths. We also get a veterans transition plan built into that. So if I'm a military service member getting out in the next 6 months, it'll automatically tell me what do I need to do in order to be successful with my transition, and has a list of almost 87 different steps depending at what point in your transition you are getting out of the military. Just one way we try to help curb that. We also do military priority of service within OhioMeansJobs.com. So whenever an employer searches for somebody like a welder, that veteran's resume will always come up first if they have the word welder in it. Just one way we try to help military veterans get linked with employers. Additionally, we have OhioMeansVeteransJobs.com. You can find information on professional licensing certifications to the various licensing certification boards across Ohio. We also got military skills translator match up directly to job openings based upon your military skill set, as well as help you with that resume wording to get that military jargon out of there. And that is all I have. If there's any questions, I'll be sticking around here, and we'll talk about those here in a few moments. Thank you for your time.
All right, so I'm pretty sure I'm the last one, other than I think Justice Kennedy giving a closing. So I'm between you and the door. So I'm going to try to keep this engaging. I think it might be a little bit of a different perspective than you've heard on some of the other veteran employment, being kind of my background and my organization. So I'm going to give a couple quick introductory things on my bio because it's going to be pertinent. So I'm the founder of an organization called Overwatch Partnership that provides veteran transition services. So we'll get to that in a minute. I'm also a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve, where I've served for about 17 years. I served active duty also for 5 years as a field artillery officer. And I mention that because I've personally gone through that transition. I have a lot of passion for it. I've been through it personally. And outside of all these things in my day job, I work for Nationwide Insurance as a finance portfolio manager within corporate finance. So just backing it up real quick, criminal justice degree, field artillery officer working in finance. So if I can do that, then there's all kinds of other veterans who are much more talented than me that can get and do these things in all kinds of different jobs if we can get them the right support to do so. So I want to lead that. I want to lead in with that up front. All right, so a couple things that I want to share with you today before we talk about Overwatch. So just provide a quick overview again from my perspective of some of the challenges facing veterans as they go through transition. Talk about some opportunities that I think we can work together on to maybe help better support veterans that are going through transition. And then I'll talk a little bit about Overwatch Partnership, my specific organization, for those that might be interested in it. So challenges facing veterans. So I got a lot of metrics up here. There's some sources up here if you want to look at them afterwards. But again, they're kind of relevant to the challenge that a lot of veterans face. And again, one caveat I think I should make based on some of the previous presentations. The veteran population that I work with is probably a little bit different than the rest of the folks. So a lot of the veterans that I'm working with are probably not homeless. They probably don't have significant challenges, at least with mental health or substance abuse. That doesn't mean they're any less deserving of getting help, transitioning, or finding meaningful employment. So throw that out up front. So 64% of veterans experience difficult transitions. So that could be across the board. It could be in getting the job. It could be acclimatizing to the job. But in general, most veterans, myself included, have a hard time transitioning. A large number of veterans also specific to that transition, just getting the job, finding the employment, finding something they can be meaningful with. Again, transitioning to something that's meaningful for me. I thought I was going to be an FBI agent. I obviously don't do that. I work in corporate finance. Probably not as exciting. Maybe should have thought that through, but wasn't where I thought I would be looking at it, 10 or more years ago. The next bullet is I think is kind of a little bit of a new thing for a lot of folks when they see it. About a third of veterans report being underemployed. The next slide kind of talks through this in more detail exactly about what that is. But for those looking to help veterans, underemployment is a really important thing to understand because it's different than unemployment. So we'll talk to that in a minute. Next bullet, veteran representation in private sector executives has fallen. So if we're looking at where things were, post-World War II, post-Korea, post-Vietnam, where we had a lot of people that were serving due to a draft, a lot of people that got out were then going out to companies and hopefully moving up in leadership. We don't have as much of that. It's a volunteer force. There aren't as many veterans in general, not as many get out. And due to some of the challenges with that transition, you're not seeing leaders in companies, so you're not seeing people that understand veterans when they come out and transition. Again, how to hire them, how to employ them, how to put them in leadership tracks that get them into meaningful employment. So that's another significant challenge. Again, last bullet, we've got a lot of veterans in Ohio. To be honest, I'm not sure if we're sixth anymore. The main thing to take away is there are a lot of veterans transitioning to Ohio, so it's something that is a big challenge. So veteran underemployment. So again, based on the different studies you look at, between a third to two-thirds of veterans are considered to be underemployed, which we got to a lot of definitions earlier. Underemployment, full-time work that is either objectively or subjectively below a given employee or veteran's education, experience, or comparable compensation level. So that person thinks that job is basically not requisite to their background or experience, and that's, we'll get into it, but that could also be due a little bit to the part of the veteran if they're not selling themselves right, and also on the employer who wants to hire veterans and not coming to the plate to help understand them. But again, looking at some of the challenges up here related to underemployment, a large portion of veterans say they weren't sure what career path they wanted to go to, and that was a part of their transition. Again, that was personal for me. I didn't know what I wanted to do. Some of these transition offices, TAP offices, ACAP offices help them with that. But again, it's sometimes as a veteran, when they get out, it's like when you're in college, do you know what you wanted to do when you finished up college? Probably not. I started out as a aeronautical engineering major, finished up in criminal justice. So same thing in the military. When you first get out, you may think that you want to go into aircraft maintenance. That might not be where you want to be in a few years. So those transition services aren't necessarily everything they need to be for a veteran that's getting out. Other transition challenges, again, education, certifications, and translating military skills. That's huge. For one, in certain career fields, you need to have certain certifications. So if you're going to go in IT, there's all kinds of different certifications required. You're going to be a project manager, there's certifications. Doing process engineering, there's certifications. So for employers or those in the room that work for agencies looking to place veterans, providing opportunities for those veterans to go through at no cost to them certification or kind of training boot camps are a huge thing that are helpful for veterans to be able to get those jobs, because then they're coming to the plate in the interviews with those things already, versus the employer needing to say, whether they can do so or not, hey, I'm willing to assume risk on this skill or this certification just because you're a veteran and we think your employment experience is gonna work. That helps them be a little bit more comfortable. So that's definitely a challenge. And then the next bullet here, only 45% of veterans remain at their first job for more than 2 years, but beyond that, their retention is really high, which looking at that would probably tell us that there's something that's a specific challenge about that first job. And again, I think it really ties back to what was that transition, and did that veteran get put into the right job or the right level of job that was a fit for them? Because if not, they're gonna leave. And without airing dirty laundry, we see it nationwide. We see it at all kinds of different companies in Columbus and all over the state and the country. So that speaks to the challenge of getting those veterans into the right place. And then the last thing here, 70% of veterans take a step back in seniority. And again, especially for those veterans that stay in longer. So if you have somebody that's like a very senior enlisted, that's like a master sergeant, or somebody on the officer side that's a colonel, lieutenant colonel, it's even harder at that point, because they're not going to go into a company and become a CFO or a vice president or a CEO in most instances. So the higher up you get, the harder it is to get a company to be willing to bite on transitioning that veteran into a meaningful role if you don't help them with that transition journey. So in the next slide here, I'll talk a little bit about, again, just real quick, some recommendations. We don't have a lot of time today, but if there's people that want to engage outside of today, happy to chat and engage outside of today's conversation. So opportunities, and again, some of these things, there's organizations, there's agencies that are already doing this, some aren't. Some of this is specific to private sector, but for those who are interested, here's definitely some good opportunities, some best practices that I've seen or been involved in. So transition boot camps. So it's something that's at no cost to the veteran and not specific to even necessarily hiring them. So there's agencies that host these. There's specific companies. I know, for instance, in Columbus, Cardinal Health hosts a pretty good version of one of these, where again, they'll do resume prep, they'll do skills translation in kind of like a half day or full day session. They'll do interview coaching, and they'll provide, in some instances, free offerings of in-demand technical certifications or skills. So that's one thing. The mentoring and networking piece, Our organization specifically does that. There are others out there, but again, it's pairing a veteran with somebody that's in the career field or has gone through the journey that they want to do. So it's kind of a more personal thing that they're working with them over time on, again, which is what we do, which I'll speak to, and then providing networking opportunities, which I'll say right now during COVID is especially challenged because everybody's tired of doing the Zoom meetings and everything else. So it's been difficult the last year or two doing the networking piece, but we're getting back around to it. And then onboarding, retention, and engagement. So once they hire those veterans, again, how do you continue to help them progress, get the coaching they need, acclimatizing to getting outside of the military? So there's things called associate resource groups, business resource groups. Again, they're in private sector, but also in government agencies, where again you can have people, whether they're veterans or non-veterans, for them to engage with as they go through that transition journey, which really can take a few years or more. Veteran and leader onboarding, training, and materials. Again, you don't want to put it all on the veteran. So for those leaders that want to hire veterans or companies that want to hire veterans and place them under leaders, making sure that those leaders understand that retention journey and can help guide them and coach them through that journey is also important. I've also seen employment of onboarding buddies. So you assign somebody, again, that's a veteran or a non-veteran that works with that person as they transition to kind of be a personal, sounding board for that person as they go through that transition. So those are all kind of some best practices. Last one here, again, veteran hiring process improvements. So working with talent acquisition, working with recruiters to help them with that skills translation. Again, in my experience, it's been on both sides. You want to help that veteran to be able to better sell their skills so they can come to the plate in an interview and be able to say, yeah, I did this and it sounds different, but here's how I did project management, or here's how I did, how I did finance or whatever else you can think of that they did in the military. Here's how it does translate, even if you wouldn't be aware of that. But it's also on the hiring manager side for them to help understand, have some skills translation tools, which I think we mentioned, some of the ones that are out there that are kind of automated tools to help translate some of those things. And then lastly, just working with veterans associates in that application or resume review process. If you've got people internal to your agency, internal to your company that are veterans, and I think that was mentioned earlier by Ryan Blackburn in the earlier presentation this morning, bring veterans into your hiring process. I've done that personally at Nationwide. When we're going through a boot camp, they'll say, hey, hiring boot camp, they'll say, hey, can you screen these resumes for me and highlight some things that I might not understand out of it based on your military experience, because there's a lot of acronyms and, again, things that are really the same thing, but they sound or look different. So just some quick opportunities that are the best ones that I've seen and working through the last few years that, again, can really help those veterans that are transitioning to get in the right place and to get some meaningful employment. So, did that went through? The video. So just to break things up a little bit, segueing into the Overwatch partnership overview, there's a quick 2-minute video that kind of gives a quick introduction to our organization. Then I'll hit on a couple key things, and then we'll be done with my portion. All right, so real quick on Overwatch partnership, gave you a quick intro with the video. Mission, you can read it on here. I'll highlight a couple things. So we support veteran transition through some key services that I'll highlight on the next slide. We also work with the overall veteran community, so a lot of the public sector services, state, local, mostly probably not federal, and then also with kind of other veteran outreach services and kind of try to bring a network together. Some mentions earlier of how do we kind of get a lot of the services together. We help be a part of that as well, but the biggest focus is on the veterans. So solution side, so 3 main services that we do: talent specialist advising. So we work with volunteer HR recruiters from companies all across Columbus, again, to help work with veterans on that skills translation, with kind of branding, with resume translation. We partner them up with a mentor. So 50% of our mentors are veterans. The other 50% are non-veterans, because if you're going to work outside the military, it's probably important that you know as a veteran how you relate to people that are not. So it's important for us that we bring in people that are veterans and are not on the mentor side. So we partner that mentee with a mentor who they then work with for the next 6 to 12 months on whatever they decide their individual journey needs to be. And then the last piece, which is new for us, is we're partnering with a for-profit startup, but at no cost to us or the veteran, on specific interview preparation. So they put together interview guides that are specific to that company, that even in some instances that person that's interviewing them, to give them a packet going into an interview and also a quick coaching session. So again, just setting the veterans up to best sell themselves and land that role that's going to be meaningful for them. So that's main services. Again, by the numbers, we're not a huge organization. I'll say that. We're specific to Columbus, Ohio. So these numbers are actually kind of dated, but I'll say it's probably not a lot more than that because the last 2 years has been kind of slow. So it's maybe up to maybe 130, 140 mentees at this point, which again, may not seem like a lot, but to us, it's pretty meaningful. And for those out there that they're in different support capacities for veterans, for me personally, I've struggled a little bit with how hard it's been to engage veterans over the last 2 years. But I heard a story that's called the Starfish. It would be meaningful. It was meaningful for me, so I'm going to share it. I'll take 60 seconds to share it. But I'd heard about it in a TV show called Ted Lasso, but it's not where the quote came from. But the story real quick is someone goes out to a beach, they see someone they think is dancing on the beach, and so they go up and they see all these starfish that are they're stranded out on the beach. And what the person's actually doing is twirling, kind of throwing the starfish out in the water, and the person goes up to him and says, "There's thousands of starfish that are stranded out here. How do you think you're going to make a difference?" And they go and they throw the other starfish out into the water, and they say, "Well, I made a difference for that one." So when I think about the veterans that we're helping, when I look at numbers and how challenging it can be at times to engage that population, even one is meaningful to me personally. So I just want to share that story because when I struggle with it, I'm like, hey, no matter what, if I made a difference for one person, then that's good enough for me. I think some of the numbers aren't showing up as much, but some of the metrics that were here that are the colors I think are weird on was just around people recommending the program. So in general, our feedback has been great as far as recommending the program to other veterans, developing a professional network, being placed in a job, which is not a guarantee. So we guarantee to work with a mentee, a transitioning veteran, and help them, but we don't guarantee employment for a myriad of reasons. But we do, that is normally an outcome of that. Last piece, again, and this is probably for a takeaway for those that are interested specifically on the transition side. I've highlighted some resources. Again, this is not the end-all, be-all, but local organizations, obviously Overwatch Partnership is there. There's an organization called the Central Ohio Veterans Consortium. So for those that have not heard of them, it's specific to Central Ohio, but it's companies, nonprofits, governmental agencies at the local and state level that are partnering to try to bring all these resources together. So if you're in Central Ohio, you're looking for kind of a clearinghouse, they're trying to get there. They're not there yet. Columbus Rotary also does some veteran networking and is looking to stand up kind of something similar to the Central Ohio Veterans Consortium. And then there's resources for veterans if you're looking to point them to most college and universities. I know Ohio State specifically has a veteran military program. And then most of the companies have employee resource groups. Most larger companies have employee resource groups that you can point veterans to. And then I've just thrown out a couple national organizations that we've worked with, again, just as resources. So that's all I've got for today. I'll hang out afterwards. I know this is quick. If anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me, or we're on LinkedIn, we're on Facebook. We've got a great website. You can feel free to reach out to me or anyone from our organization through those means as well. Thank you.
All right, so we ran over our time with this session as well, but as we're transitioning, just checked, anybody have any questions for any of the group that we could? Yeah.
Just kind of wondering what the residential drug treatment might look like in Dayton. We come from the Veteran Treatment Court in Stark County, and we've sent several up to Wade Park, and they come back to us, they start using again. It's like, well, what did you learn when you were in residential? Why aren't you applying those skills? And like, I was walking a room with an iPad. I didn't really learn much. Is it looking the same right now in Dayton, or?
Well, I'm actually in Cincinnati. So in Cincinnati, no, and that's philosophically something that I never, even at the height of COVID, I said we're not doing virtual programming in residential treatment because that doesn't make any sense. So we found ways. We got creative. We had to limit numbers and groups, but we used technology to split them into 2 rooms and connect and provide treatment that way. So we've continued to do face-to-face care the entire time. In terms of the actual treatments themselves, I think most residential programs are offering, evidence-based, substance-related treatment, cognitive behavioral treatments, things of that nature. But to the point, it is different when you're doing that in a locked setting where you're being supervised very, very closely, and when you transition. And so for me, it's much more about having a good transition plan and making sure they are well connected back into outpatient care when they leave, because those gains, no matter how good they are in residential, they won't endure if they don't have that type of connection. And that can be through VA providers, that can be through self-help groups. If there is a positive out of COVID, a lot of the self-help groups have virtual options. So, if someone is going to Wade Park for treatment, I would certainly encourage them to use those iPads to connect with an AA or an NA meeting back where they're going to be living when they leave, so that they already have that connection and can very seamlessly transition back into that self-help as part of their strategy when they do depart.
And it's a 30-day program is how it's described to me, but as soon as they get back, they're relapsing. And it's frustrating to see people who qualify for Medicaid be able to go to our local providers, but we can't send our vets there. So I didn't know if there was a plan for that gap.
So they're doing this short-term stabilization, is that what you're saying? And then they're coming back to you all?
Yeah, and then most of them are relapsing,
Okay.
almost immediately.
So do they have outpatient follow-up back?
They do,
Okay,
but it's not very effective.
okay. And then do you have a sense of what proportion of them are struggling with opiate addiction?
100%.
So
Sadly.
I don't know what the resources are there, but research shows that 85% of opiate addicted individuals will relapse within the first year if they do not have access to medication assisted treatments like methadone, Vivitrol, Suboxone. So if that's not something that they have access to and that they can continue to use, and if that's not being allowed or encouraged, we're missing the boat, because opiate addiction needs medication assisted treatment to be successful.
Can you speak to length of residential treatment? And
So the research would show that the bulk of benefit for research and residential probably occurs in the first 30 to 60 days. That whatever they're going to take away is likely going to be learned in those first 30 to 60 days. Once we go beyond 60 days, it flattens, the curve flattens, it's plateaued. There's not necessarily greater length of sobriety just because you're in treatment for 4, 5, 6, 7 months. So, if it's only 30 days, maybe there's an opportunity to extend that, an extra week or two to see if there can be a little bit better benefit. But again, it's going to come back to the transition. It's going to come back to what are the outpatient pieces that are available to them to kind of help them really stabilize and endure whatever they've learned in treatment. The other thing to keep in mind is that the average number of times it takes someone in treatment to actually get it and sustain sobriety is 7.
Right. I've heard all the statistics that you're talking about. One of the big gaps that I see is that we can put people in transitional housing, so it's not necessarily that residential program, but when they're at our local treatment providers, they can go to some of the sober living housing, and they do better, from what I can tell.
Right. So we do make use of that. We have people who actually finish residential and choose to go to sober living as part of their transition. And there are definitely times when that makes very good sense. One of the challenges you sometimes see with sober living environments is that some of them have more restrictive about what kind of medications they're allowed to be on. And that can be a barrier for those that are on the medication assisted if they don't allow methadone or Suboxone or those types of things.
Well, so at the end of the day, I see that we have the resources available through local providers, but I don't think that they have VA contracts. So that's sort of the issue. Kind of, you were talking about the transitional and trying to expand the programming. So what would be nice is if there isn't something within the VA system, if there was a network of providers that were going to accept TRICARE.
And each VA should have a community care coordinator because there is a lot of VA money available when we cannot meet those needs in the local community. But it does then rely on each individual community provider to go through the mechanisms to become established as a community care provider. And so there's got to be some partnership there in terms of them working through those steps to
That's
do
kind of
that.
what I'm looking at. I'd like to light a fire under the local VJOs to go out and talk to the local providers and try to establish some of those contracts so that we can put people in the program that they need immediately, because we don't have very good outcomes when we have to wait, right? We have
Sure.
people that overdose and pass away.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the VJO probably would, they might be able to get in touch with the community care. That's more on the patient business side of the house in the VA, and more the administrative folks. But if they don't know who that is, they should be able to figure out who that is, and they can kind of make some of those connections and see if that's a resource that might be able to become developed in your area.
Well, because one of the limitations that I have is, as a judge, I can't go out to the local treatment providers and say, hey, you guys should do this. This is an opportunity
Right.
for you. But I
Right.
see the need. So
Yep.
thank you for your information.
Sure.
Thank you. Did you have?
I was just going to say real quick, the Chillicothe VA does have the GPD beds. That is going to be the equivalent to your sober living programs. So if they are going through treatment at the Chillicothe VA, then they do have the homeless team with the coordinated entry specialist. That it's Kay Payne. She can then get them. So if they're having that, they need that extra support, then GPD is what they are probably going to want. Kay can get them connected. That is going to either be at PICA or at LSS in Fairfield County.
Thank you. Any other? Okay, we'll transition. Okay, we'll transition back to you, Justice Kennedy. And thank you all. Thank you for your presentations, and appreciate the time.